Sometimes, the people who stay the quietest carry the loudest stories. They're the ones who have learned to hide their light, not because they don't have one, but because the world hasn't always been kind when they tried to shine. That's exactly how it was for Nina, a shy waitress who spent her nights serving tables at a small diner on the edge of London, always polite, always invisible. Until one night, a group of customers decided to turn her silence into their entertainment. "Come on, sweetheart," one of them laughed, pointing at her trembling hands. "If you want a tip, serve it with a dance." The diner erupted in cruel laughter, but from the corner booth, one man didn't laugh. He just looked up from his coffee, calm, focused, and that man was Jason Statham. What happened next turned a moment of mockery into something no one in that diner would ever forget. Before we continue, if you've been following our stories, you know we share moments that reveal the quiet strength in ordinary people and how kindness, courage, and timing can change everything. If you're new here, welcome to the family. Because what happened that night wasn't just about a dance, it was about respect, and how one act of bravery can rewrite a life in seconds. The diner was one of those places that time seemed to forget. A narrow, old-fashioned spot tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop, where the smell of coffee lingered in the walls and the jukebox in the corner hadn't worked right in years. It wasn't glamorous, not even close, but to Nina it was her safe place. The chipped tiles, the squeaky door, even the buzzing neon sign that flickered above the window every night, they were familiar, predictable. And for someone like Nina, predictable meant peace. She was 24, soft-spoken, and kind to a fault. The kind of person who remembered every customer's order, every regular's favorite booth, every child's name. But she wasn't the kind of person anyone really noticed. At least, not until that night. It was a Friday evening, the diner's busiest time. The door kept chiming as groups of friends poured in, laughter filling the air. The smell of fries and coffee hung thick, and the low hum of conversation made it feel almost warm, almost alive. Nina moved between tables with quiet efficiency, tray in hand, her hair pulled back neatly, her steps light and deliberate. At a corner booth, a group of men had been drinking more coffee than conversation required, loud, confident, the kind who like to make themselves the center of the room. They'd been teasing the staff all evening, cracking jokes that weren't funny, tipping in coins instead of bills. And Nina had done what she always did, smiled politely, avoided conflict, and kept serving. But when she came by their table again, refilling cups with a soft, "Here you go," one of them, tall, with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes, leaned back and said, "Hey, sweetheart, lighten up. You look like you're working at a funeral." His friends chuckled, Nina's cheeks flushed. "I'm just doing my job, sir," she said quietly. He nudged the man beside him. "Yeah, but you gotta enjoy it. You ever seen those TikToks where waitresses dance for tips?" The second man laughed. "Oh yeah, maybe she can give us a little show, huh?" Nina froze, the tray trembled slightly in her hand. I don't dance." "Oh, come on," the first man pressed. "Don't be shy, we'll make it worth your while." He pulled out a single crumpled bill and placed it on the counter, just a little spin for fun. His friends howled with laughter. The sound stung, not because of the words, but because of the mockery underneath them, the way they turned her into something to laugh at. Her throat tightened. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, one of them added, "What, you too good for a laugh? Just dance, sweetheart, it's not that deep." The whole diner seemed to quiet for a moment. From a booth near the window, a man looked up from his coffee. He'd been sitting there for nearly an hour, quiet, alone, watching the room the way someone might watch a storm form in the distance. That man was Jason Statham. He'd been on his way out of town, a long drive ahead, a brief stop for caffeine before hitting the road again. But something about the diner had made him stay longer than usual. Maybe it was the calm hum of it, or maybe it was her. He'd noticed Nina the moment he walked in, the way she moved quietly through the chaos, never raising her voice, never frowning. There was a patience to her, a grace that didn't ask to be seen. And now, as the men at the corner table kept laughing, Jason's jaw clenched ever so slightly. He'd seen this scene too many times, not in films, not in bars, but in real life. The kind where power came from laughter and cruelty hid behind just joking. Nina stood still, eyes on the floor, the heat of embarrassment rising up her neck. Every instinct told her to walk away, to hide. But something inside her, small, trembling but firm, said no. Not this time. She set the tray down, slowly. Her hands were shaking, but she lifted her head anyway. I said I don't dance, she said softly. The tall man grinned wider, sensing an audience. Well, maybe you should learn, darling. You'd make a lot more tips if you smiled and moved a little. Laughter again, louder this time. And then a calm, low voice from across the diner. Careful what you ask for. The laughter stopped. The man turned. Jason Statham was sitting there, elbows on the table, coffee cup in hand, eyes locked on him. For a moment no one moved. The air felt heavier somehow. Jason's tone wasn't angry. It wasn't even loud. But it carried weight, the kind that made even confident men hesitate. Excuse me, the tall man said, forcing a laugh. Jason set his cup down slowly. You said you wanted to see her dance, he said, his voice even. Might be she's better than you think. The man blinked. What's it to you? Jason leaned back slightly. Just saying, sometimes when people push others to perform, they end up showing who they really are. The man smirked, trying to recover his bravado. Yeah, and who are you supposed to be? Jason's eyes narrowed just a little. Someone who's seen too many idiots mistake cruelty for humor. A hush fell over the diner. Even the cook in the back stopped clattering pans. Nina looked between them, heart racing. She didn't want to fight, but something in Jason's calm gave her courage. She took a breath. You want to dance, she said suddenly. The men turned toward her, surprised. Jason's brow furrowed slightly, watching her. Nina stepped back, clearing a small space beside the jukebox. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with her phone, scrolling through songs until she found one, slow at first, soft piano notes that filled the silence. She wasn't a dancer, not professionally, not anymore. But once, years ago, before everything fell apart, she had danced. Before her mother got sick, before bills and rent replaced dreams and auditions. She hadn't even told anyone at the diner. Now, as the song began, her fear shifted slowly into focus. She closed her eyes, took a breath, and moved. At first it was small, a turn of her wrist, a step, a sway. But with every beat she remembered. The rhythm came back, her body remembering what her mind had tried to forget. The mockers fell silent. Every motion carried something raw, something real. The way her arms cut through the air, the way her feet slid softly against the floor, it wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And Jason watched, not with surprise, but with quiet respect. Because he saw what no one else did. This wasn't just dancing, this was release. A woman reclaiming her dignity, one step at a time. The song built slowly and she moved faster, not for applause, not for approval, but for herself. The laughter in the room was gone now, replaced by awe. By the time the final note faded, you could have heard a pin drop. Nina stood there, chest rising and falling, tears welling in her eyes, but she didn't look down this time. She looked straight ahead. Jason was already standing. He started clapping. Once, twice. Then the rest of the diner joined in. Even the men who'd mocked her didn't know what to do, their smirks gone, replaced by something like shame. Jason stepped forward, stopped in front of Nina, and said quietly, "You just made everyone in this room remember what grace looks like." Nina blinked, startled. I just didn't want to be laughed at." Jason smiled faintly. You owned the room." He turned to the men at the booth. "You wanted to dance. Hope you paid attention. That's what courage looks like." The men muttered something under their breath, dropped some cash on the table, and hurried out. The door chimed behind them, leaving only the hum of the old ceiling fan and the soft sound of the coffee pot bubbling. Jason reached into his jacket pocket and handed Nina a small card. "If you ever want to do that for a living," he said, "come by the studio tomorrow. We're looking for people who have got something real." Nina looked down. The card read Statham Productions. Her breath caught. "You're serious?" Jason smirked. "Dead serious. Talent's easy to find, hard is." And with that he nodded once, turned and walked out into the night. When the door shut behind him, Nina just stood there, the card trembling in her hand. The cook leaned over the counter. "You okay, kid?" She smiled for the first time all night. "Yeah," she whispered, "I think I finally am." Outside, the rain had started falling again, soft, rhythmic, steady. Jason slipped his hands into his pockets, looked back once through the diner window, and smiled faintly. Sometimes strength doesn't need fists. Sometimes it just needs a song and the courage to dance. The morning air carried a light drizzle when Nina stepped off the bus, clutching the small business card Jason Statham had handed her the night before. It was still slightly damp from her fingers, as though her mind hadn't quite accepted it was real. Statham Productions. The name alone sounded unreal, like something that belonged in a world far away from her diner apron and night shifts. She stood outside the address printed on the back, an unmarked building on the East End of London, surrounded by warehouse studios and graffiti-stained brick walls. Through the glass doors, she could hear faint music, rhythmic, steady, the sound of a drumbeat pulsing through the floor. Her heart pounded. Part of her wanted to turn around, pretend the whole thing had never happened. "What am I doing here?" she thought. "I'm not a dancer anymore." But then she remembered Jason's words from the night before. "Talent's easy to find, hard is." She took a breath and pushed open the door. Inside, the world shifted. The walls were lined with mirrors and soundproof panels. The air smelled faintly of wood polish and sweat. A group of young dancers were already rehearsing in the center, their movements sharp, their timing perfect. Nina froze by the doorway, unsure where to go. A woman with a headset, tall, confident, clipboard in hand, noticed her and walked over. "Can I help you?" Nina hesitated, holding out the card. Mr. Statham told me to come by last night." The woman's expression softened the moment she saw the name. "Ah, you must be Nina." Nina blinked. You know my name." She smiled. "He told us to expect you. Come on in." They crossed the floor, passing dancers mid-routine, bodies flowing like water, sweat glistening under the overhead lights. Nina felt like she'd stepped into another planet. The woman pointed toward a smaller practice room on the left. "He's in there." Jason was leaning against the far wall, watching two stunt performers run through a sequence, one throwing a slow-motion punch, the other dodging gracefully before countering. He turned as Nina entered. For a moment that same quiet, unreadable calm crossed his face, then a small smile. "You came," he said simply. Nina nodded nervously. "I almost didn't." Jason chuckled softly. "That's how you know you should have." He motioned for her to sit. "This is my training studio. We do everything here: choreography, stage movement, stunt work. You said you danced before." Nina nodded. "Years ago, mostly contemporary and ballet, but after my mum got sick I stopped. I had to work." Jason folded his arms. "Life happens, doesn't mean the rhythm leaves you." She looked around. "Everyone here looks incredible. I don't think I belong." He tilted his head slightly. "You didn't belong in that diner either, but you still owned it." That made her smile. Jason picked up a tablet and tapped a few buttons. "All right, let's see what happens when no one's laughing this time." Music filled the room, slow, soft at first, then building into a steady pulse. Nina hesitated, her body tense. "I haven't danced in front of anyone in years." Jason shrugged. "Then don't dance for me, dance with yourself, like you did last night." He turned away slightly, giving her space, not watching her like a critic, but like someone who understood what vulnerability looked like. Nina closed her eyes. And then she moved. At first her body felt stiff, uncertain. The mirrors seemed too bright, the air too heavy, but with each beat the tension eased. Her feet found the rhythm, her arms started to remember. The studio faded, the noise disappeared. It was just her and the music, a quiet conversation between who she was and who she might still become. Jason watched silently, his expression unreadable but focused. Every gesture, every step told him what words couldn't. When the music ended, Nina stood still, breathless, her eyes glossy. Jason finally spoke. "You know what I saw?" She shook her head. "Someone who doesn't realize she's already good enough." Her throat tightened. "You're just being kind." He smiled faintly. "I don't do kind, I do honest." That made her laugh through her tears. He handed her a bottle of water. "I've got a charity event next week, big one, live performance. I was going to have one of our dancers lead it, but—" Her eyes widened. "But what?" Jason shrugged. "Something tells me the world deserves to see what I saw." Nina blinked, stunned. "You want me to perform?" Jason nodded once. "If you're up for it." The days that followed were a blur. Every morning before sunrise, Nina took the bus to the studio. Jason wasn't always there. Sometimes he was on set, sometimes in meetings, but he made sure someone worked with her every day. The first week was brutal. Her muscles ached, her feet blistered, her body protested every movement. But with each passing day, something else took root: discipline. Jason dropped by one evening while she was rehearsing, sitting quietly by the door. "You're pushing too hard," he said after a while. Nina looked up, panting. "I have to get it right." He shook his head. "You don't get it right, you feel it right, big difference." She frowned. "I don't understand." He stood, walking to the center of the floor. "When you danced at the diner, you weren't perfect. You were honest. That's what made people stop laughing. That's what I want here. Don't lose that." Nina nodded slowly, letting his words sink in. From that day, she stopped chasing perfection and started chasing truth. The night of the event came faster than she expected. The venue was massive, an old theater in central London, its lights glowing gold against the night sky. Inside, the seats were filled with industry people, performers, and charity donors. Backstage, Nina could hear the murmur of the crowd. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her costume, simple, elegant, nothing flashy. Jason found her just before she went on. "You nervous?" he asked. She exhaled shakily, terrified. He smirked. "Good, means you care." She gave a nervous laugh. "What if I freeze out there?" Jason looked her in the eye. "Then breathe. Remember why you're dancing. You're not performing for them, you're proving something to yourself." Nina nodded slowly. "Right." He squeezed her shoulder lightly. "Go remind them what courage looks like." The lights dimmed. A single spotlight fell onto the stage. The music began, low, haunting, slow. For a moment, Nina stood motionless. Every heartbeat echoed in her ears. Every doubt whispered louder than the applause. And then she stepped forward. Her first movement was small, a turn of the wrist, a bend of the knee, but it rippled through the silence like a spark. The crowd leaned in. As the music swelled, so did she. Her movements carried emotion, the exhaustion, the fear, the memory of standing in that diner surrounded by laughter. But also the strength of standing tall despite it. Every motion told her story, not with words but with grace. Jason watched from the wings, arms crossed, expression unreadable. But when she spun into that final crescendo, a leap that landed in perfect stillness, he smiled, just slightly. The lights faded. Silence. Then a wave of applause, not polite, not obligatory but thunderous. Nina stood frozen, chest rising and falling, eyes glistening. She bowed, shaky, humble, and looked toward the side of the stage. Jason was already clapping. He mouthed, "You did it." After the show, reporters and organizers surrounded her. "Are you a professional dancer? Where did you train? Will you be performing again?" Nina barely knew how to answer. Jason finally stepped in, putting a hand on her shoulder. "She's part of the team now," he said simply. Her eyes widened. "Part of?" He nodded. "Full-time assistant choreographer, you earned it." She blinked in disbelief. "I don't know what to say." Jason smiled. "Say yes before I change my mind." She laughed through tears. "Yes." Weeks turned into months. Nina became part of the studio family, not as the shy waitress from the diner, but as a dancer, a creator, a mentor to others who felt like they didn't belong. Jason didn't treat her like a charity case. He treated her like an equal, someone who'd fought her own battles and found her rhythm again. Sometimes after late rehearsals, they'd sit by the studio doors, watching the city lights. "Funny, isn't it?" she'd say, "how everything started because someone tried to make fun of me." Jason would chuckle. "Yeah, sometimes the worst moments introduce you to the best versions of yourself." She nodded. "Guess life's a strange teacher." He smiled faintly. The best ones always are. Months later, the diner where it all started got a new jukebox. One night Nina stopped by, not as an employee but as a customer. The same waitress who'd once worked beside her smiled when she saw her. "Nina, you're on TV now, aren't you? I saw you in that charity show." Nina laughed. "Guess so." From the corner booth, an old man who'd been sitting quietly looked up. "You're that dancer, right? The one who shut those guys up." She smiled. "Yeah, that was me." The man grinned. "Good on you, love, you showed them." She looked around the diner, the same lights, the same hum, and realized something profound. The place hadn't changed. She had. Outside, as she stepped into the cool evening air, she pulled out her phone and saw a message from Jason. "New project starting next week, you in?" She smiled, typing back. "Always." The city lights reflected in her eyes as she walked down the street, the faint rhythm of her footsteps almost like a beat, soft, steady, alive. And somewhere across town, Jason Statham looked at the lineup for his next production, her name listed among the lead choreographers. He smiled to himself and said quietly, "Told you, talent's easy to find, hard is."